discover you give me reason through every season. Together we can do anything we believe in. All the world is ours to take. You and me will find a way. Oh, the wonder that awaits. Here we are, forever starts. Through it all and what we face, you and me will find a way. Oh, the wonder that awaits. Here we are, forever starts today.
I'm back. Hey, so anyway, can I say this real quick? I want you to do me a favor. I want you to look at the person next to you, look at the person to your right or your left, and I want you to say hello. Remember when I was 32? Just go ahead, and maybe you're not even 32 yet, and that's cool. You can say, remember when I was 2, and maybe they can't remember when you were 2. But you know what the cool thing is somebody does, and somebody will. And many of us in here, we've got this idea of what we want people to think about when they think about me, right? I don't know about you, but I've come to grips with, I've realized, I've thought through this, and my knowledge is not just significantly huge, but at the same time, I do think I have wisdom. In fact, I was hanging out with my 3-year-old the other day, and here's how he pointed out my wisdom. We were acknowledging gray walls in our room. And I said, hey, those are gray walls. And he goes, like your hair. And I said, Stephen, no, it's actually brown hair. No, Dad, it's gray, like the walls. I'm like, but we all have, and this is what I know. This is what I know about myself and what I know about many of us in here. We all have this idea of what we want to be known for. We all want to be known for something, don't we? I mean, when you come to mind, there are adjectives that are in your mind that lead you to think about what you want to be known for when you come to mind. There's adjectives that come to mind when you think of yourself. There's adjectives that come to mind when you think about it. And here's where this becomes very, very real, is there's adjectives that think about when you're posting on Instagram, right? What do I want to be known for? What do I want people to think about when they read this post? What do I want people to think about when they see this story that I post on Instagram, right? We all have this idea, this perception, this idea that we want to push forward. We want people to know, maybe not the real me, we want people to know the me that I want people to think about when they think about me. And then what happens? We look at different social media posts, we see pictures of people doing things, and we think, I need to post more pictures about me traveling. And so we travel and we take pictures, selfies of us, with the beach behind us, or maybe we don't even go to the beach, but we're like close to the beach, and we'll take selfies of ourselves by the beach so that people perceive that we're at the beach and we're getting excited about, hey, guess where we went? We begin thinking about all the pictures we see of other people's food, and we're like, we need to post more pictures of food. We need people to see that I'm a good cook, right? And so we post what we had at lunch. We post the steak that we just pulled off the grill, and it was probably a stock photo because you looked at your steak and it's like, ooh, those lines aren't right. So let me find something, and you're like, ooh, Ruth Chris. Nobody will ever know, right? Like, we all, when we think about who we want to be, we have something in our mind that leads us to think, or leads us to perceive, or leads us to push an image forward. For me, and I want you thinking about this, what is it for you? When you think about yourself, what do you want to be known for? In fact, if it's okay, Simon, in just a few moments, I'm going to start, and then we're going to just go around the room. I want you to you'll just stand up and say, hey, this is what I want to be known for. Y'all are laughing. Like, I think we got... For me, I'll just be honest, I have this deep desire that I want to be known for being smart. That's just me. In fact, I love to order books, and I love for books to come in, and I love to read like the first portion of it, and then do a Google search on the book to see if I can get a really good book review on it. I'm just being honest and transparent here. And then I can read the book review on it, and then I'll think, oh, that is a great book, and maybe I'll finish it, or maybe I'm just like, that book review did it enough for me, so I'll put that book up and I'll go to the next book. Right? Like, I want this picture of myself. When people think of me, I want people to think, man, that guy's smart. That guy's wise, right? Like, And so how do I perceive smartness? Through books. I want people to think about it, and I really do love to read, don't get me wrong, but I just gave you my secret. Sometimes I'll read the first 2 chapters, I'm like, wah, wah, right? And you're like, you lost me, dude. But you want to allow people, or I love Audible books, right? You can go like 3 times and 6 times as fast, and it's like, wah, and you're just like speed read, you just read 6 hours in an hour, and I read it, right? Like I wasn't paying attention to it, but it was in my head, osmosis. What do you want to be known for? When you think about it, I mean, that's one thing, and that's just one minor element. But when I think about myself, like I want to be known as a good father. I want to be known as a good husband. I want to be known as a good leader. Like there's certain things when I begin to think about what do I want to be known for, there's certain things that come to mind. And I would imagine you probably have those same ideas. There's certain things that come to mind. There's certain realities that we want to push forward. So I would ask you, we're not going to ask everybody to stand up and say it because you can't do that in here. But what is it you want to be known for? What is it that when people think about you that you want to be known for? The problem is, and I've seen this often, is there's times that we just don't measure up. There's times that we look at ourselves in the mirror and we know the adjectives we want people to think about, but we've just failed to measure up to what our reality is. Maybe even going a step further, what happens when you fail to measure up to you? What happens when you fail to measure up to the standard you want to put forward, the idea, the identity you want to push forward? What happens is we tend to pretend. We tend to pretend that maybe this isn't reality. We tend to make excuses for why we didn't measure up to what we really wanted to measure up to. We pretend, we begin to make excuses, and at times we mislead. We begin to tell people that this is what's really going on, but this isn't really for me. Like we begin to post pictures of the perception that we want, all the while knowing deep down inside, that's not me. It's a far reach from me. And what happens when we don't measure up is we tend to manage our identity, don't we? We tend to try to go into image management, which ultimately in those moments we become imaginary. We become a shell of who we are. And what I found is imaginary individuals, and we wouldn't call ourselves that. I mean, that's kind of harsh. Like, I'm not an imaginary individual, but when we begin to manage our image and we begin to try to be somebody that we're not, what happens is we lose that genuineness that we so desperately want in other friends. We lose that genuineness, that authenticity, that vulnerability that we want in the other side of a friendship, but we're afraid to open it up for ourselves because what if they knew the real me? But here's what I found is when we are pretending, what happens is we stop growing. The moment we start pretending, the moment we go into image management, the moment we begin to stop doing we begin to portray an image that we are not, the moment we begin to try to be somebody that we're not, the moment we begin pretending is the moment we stop growing. We get older, we get more gray hair, but we don't get wiser. We get older, but we don't get finer. We get older, but isn't it true that oftentimes we get stuck? Because we're trying to be somebody that we're not, all the while not allowing ourselves to be the real me. And if I can just be honest, pastors, we're the worst at it, right? I mean, as a pastor, we tend to be a little bit difficult on this realm, right? I mean, you think about it as a parent. You want your kids to think that you have it all together. You want your kids to think that you've got the moral authority to say and to do and to act and to push people to be who they want to be. And as a pastor, there's this pressure, unspoken or not, there's a pressure for me to try to live up to the messages with which we portray. And what happens when a pastor doesn't live up to those messages? What happens when a pastor doesn't live up to that moral authority? Well, honestly, and here's the scary part, you probably would rather we pretend as well. I mean, you don't necessarily want a pastor coming up saying, hey, you know what, the other night, I'll tell you, we're gonna do a message on self-control, all right? But I just want to thank our steering team. Man, I'll tell you, they came through in a pinch. You see, I was over at the bar the other night, and I had like 5 too many, and they came and picked me up, and man, I'm just so grateful for them. But anyway, back to the message on self-control. Like, you wouldn't want to hear that. Imagine we're doing a series on marriages, and I'm like, man, Alden, great job singing about reckless love. Sorry, I don't have that same love for you. I mean, in fact, I'm so grateful that last night you told me I'm giving you one more chance. If you blow it, we're done. All right, anyway, back to making marriages work. Let's talk about to the point that we begin to vary, to the point as a pastor that we begin to vary from the very message we try to preach. There is a design inside of us that we want to pretend because ultimately you want us to pretend. You want us to be able to have that moral authority. And there's pressure there. And there's pressure across the board. As parents, you want to be able to say, you want to be able to lean into your kids and lead them in the right direction. But we've all heard the parents that say what? Do as I say, not as I do. Not that that's a bad thing, right? Like I tell my boy all the time, like, hey, you can't get on my phone, even though I've got to check my email. Get off my phone. It's bad for you, even though I've got to follow up with the text. Get off do it, even at a 3-year-old age. There's this reality that when our reality, the image we want to portray falls short of who we really are, we are tempted to pretend. And from all of us, pastors, parents, regardless of where we're at, we go into image control really quickly. So what do we do with that? What do we do when we're tempted to go into image control? What do we do when we're tempted to try to be somebody we're not? What do we do when we are pretending? How do we make the most of it? You see, I'm a firm believer that in the midst of this idea, in the midst of this reality, that there is this idea that we need to be honest and real. But it's hard because all of us, not just me, all of us have these gaps. We've got gaps between who we want to be and who we wish we were, or who we are. We've got gaps between what we want to do and what we see ourselves as. So how do we handle these gaps? Most of the time when we see the gaps, we're tempted to do what most of it, we pretend, we hide, we try to mislead, we go into image management and try to figure out what is going on. And if we were to be honest, this is the best setting for it. A row, a church. Within a church, right, we all want to have it all together. I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with individuals, with kids or students, and they begin to word vomit, right? They begin to talk about the conversation that was going on in the van on the way to church. The parents like, shh, don't talk. We're going to talk about that when we get back in the car. Smile, right? Like we've got this, we don't want the real me to come out because why? We're at church and we got to make sure our buttons are right and we got to make sure our pants are whatever you do with pants, starts, I don't know. We've got this image that we want to portray. The problem is, if people knew what you were really like, you're fearful that they would not really like you. If people knew the real you, there's a tension there that maybe they don't like the real you. But isn't it true that when we pretend, when we are tempted to put the gap there, when we're tempted to pretend and become pretendaholics, isn't it true that maybe they don't really know us? Like they know the perception of you. They know the person you want to push forward. But aren't we just a little bit afraid that the pretendaholic in us nobody's going to like? Aren't we afraid that if people don't really know what you're really like, I would say they don't really like you? That's harsh, isn't it? If people don't really know what you're really like, which many of us are in image management, we're trying to stop, halt, hold up, don't get to know the real me. But it's fearful because if they don't know the real me, could it be that they don't really like you? Could it be that they don't really like the you you're portraying? So here's what I know, is that all of us want to be known for something. All of us want to be known for something. We want to be known for something that we do. We want to be known for something, and we've got those ideas. But I would make the argument that beyond being known for something, we all need to be known by someones. We all need to have someones in our life that know us, that encourage us. That we don't have to be the pastor, we can drop the pretenses and be the person. Where we've got people in our lives that can encourage us and help us, and we don't have to feel the pressure to be manufactured. We don't have to feel the pressure to be fake and imaginary. But we can feel the freedom to be me. We all need that. We all want people that will love us. We all want relationships in which we can say, those people, they're for real, don't we? We all want those. In fact, your junior high kids, your high school kids, they want those relationships too. They come home and sometimes you're like, those friends, you just don't need to be having those friends. And they're like, but mama, you don't understand. Those people are for real. Like, they know me. They understand me. Don't tell me I can't be friends with them, because those people are for real. But could it be that the reason that they're for real is because these are the first people you chose to be real with? Could it be that the people that we choose to be real with are the people that tend to be real relationships and real friendships? So that's where we want to talk about today. We want to talk about how can we leverage that? How can we lean into this idea that we want to be known for something, but we need to be known by someone's? And for the next few minutes, I want to try to state a case that the best place for this is the local church, which is kind of foreign to many of us. We think and we have this idea that the church is not necessarily a place to be real. It's a place that I don't want people to know that I've messed up, but I want to make a case that maybe the church is legitimately for people like us. In fact, the very first church, it was an incredible church. It was led by one of the brothers of Jesus. And James, who was a pastor, a leader, he wrote a couple different documents. In fact, he wrote the book of James, which I think about this often. What would it take for an individual to be able to believe that his brother was the Savior, was the Son of God? It would probably take him dying and coming back to life. And James is one who he experienced the older brotherism. He experienced living in his brother's shadow and understanding, I can never be good enough, I can never be strong enough, I'll never make it. And then all of a sudden, something happened that changed his trajectory. And he became a pastor. He became a leader. He became one of the first pastors to go forth and say, my brother, Jesus, I want to share what he was about. And James, talking about the local church, says this, says, therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. Now, I mean, if we were going to stop there, I think this is kind of awkward, right? What if I were to just say, okay, everybody stand up. I want you just to find somebody you don't know and confess your deepest, darkest sin. Ready, go. Homie, don't play that, right? Like, if we were to say, therefore, confess your sins to each other, like, that is a difficult like, when we're in here, we can't do that. We don't want people to know our deepest, darkest sins. In fact, there's a part of us that thinks, as long as I tell God, I'm okay. As long as I'm vertical, I'm okay. But James, who's one of the first pastors, he makes this point. He says, therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for each other that you may be healed. There is value in this idea of confessing. There's value in this idea of sharing those deep, dark secrets, of sharing the weight that sometimes holds us down. We've been in those scenarios where we knew there was something that we just had to get off our chest. There was a guilt, there was a hurt, there was a frustration, and we've continued to give it to God. We've continued to give it to God. And then all of a sudden, somebody opened up and we began to share with somebody else. And you've shared something. You said, I never thought I would share that before. And then what happens? You're like, oh my goodness, I feel better. It's like a weight was lifted off our shoulders. But you don't just do that with anybody. In fact, there was another pastor. He was a leader, an early church pastor. He made this statement when it comes to the first church and what the church was meant to look like. He said, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on." To spur is to go, to encourage, to push along. "Let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds." And he continues on and he says this, "Not giving up the meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another." I mean, if I were to just say, "Hey, stand up, I want you to encourage the people around you." If you don't know them, you're probably going to say, "Hey, cool shirt. Hey, nice shoes. I love it when you smile." But when we legitimately get to know somebody else and we know the way they tick and we begin to encourage them, not superficially as in, "Hey, you look good today, you rock, you're awesome," but we begin to say, "Hey, you know what? I know you're in a difficult period in your parenting. And I want you to know the way you handled that was incredible. Thank you for leading the way. You know, I know you're going through a difficult time at work, and you standing up for your morals, you standing up for your convictions was hard because it could have costed you your job. And I want just to encourage you and let you know, thank you for being the example." When people really know you, they can encourage you well and not superficially. And I don't think that the writer of Hebrews, this early church pastor, was saying, just go and give a bunch of attaboys. He's legitimately saying, don't forsake the meeting that some are in the habit of doing, but get into each other's lives so that you can encourage them, so you can spur them, so you can know them well and encourage them right. And it doesn't happen in rows. We come in for an hour and we grab a cup of coffee and we get out of here and we maybe talk about the weather. Maybe we'll talk about football. Guess what? Cowboy season's coming up. I'm not mentioning that it's 5 days away from Aggie football, but we'll begin to have those conversations. And those are great. But the greatness of encouragement doesn't happen around a cup of coffee in a quick setting. It happens when we're legitimately known. Paul, who was one of the greatest pastors, church planners, leaders of the church. In fact, arguably, secular theorists believe that Paul was the greatest influencer in the church today, even more so than Jesus, which from a pastor's perspective, you're like, can you say that? But they believe it just because of what he went through and the things he did to spread the name of Christianity. Paul makes this statement to the church at Galatia. "Brothers and sisters, if anyone is caught in sin," in other words, you need to try to catch people. He's saying, hey, step out and just watch people. Like when they're in sin, you need to pounce on them, right? No. He says, if anyone is caught in sin, you who live by the Spirit, you who are a follower of Jesus, should restore that person, not harshly, not with a crazy finger, not trying to push them and say, ha, I'm better than you. We should restore that person gently. And he goes on in the next verse, and he says this, carry each other's burdens. In order for us to carry each other's burdens, it's critical that we know the burdens that they're carrying. In order for us to carry each other's burdens, it's critical that we know them, that we walk with them, and that we hear what's going on. It says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. And when Paul writes about the law of Christ, he's writing it from this perspective, this idea that many of the Jews, especially the good religious Jews, they understood there were like 600 laws that they had to live out. And then in comes Jesus, and they're trying to figure out, okay, which law is most important? Jesus takes 600, goes down to 2, says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbors yourself. And then they begin thinking, how do we love God? How do we love God? How do we love God? And he says, I'll tell you what, let's just narrow it down. The law of Christ is this, that we would love other people the way that God through Christ loved you. When you don't know what to do or say, love other people the way that God through Christ loved you. And he's saying this is how we fulfill the law of Christ. And he goes on and Paul writes another way that accept one another then just as Christ accepted you. Kind of what we talked about last week a little bit, this idea of genuinely being for North Tarrant involves us loving. And what does love look like? It's changing the default from being critical to being curious. Accept one another then just as Christ accepted you. You know why Christ accepted you? And I believe he did. You know why he accepted you? Because he's got an incredible plan for you. Because he wants to transform you into the person that he wants you to be. And this isn't about, hey, okay, before God can accept you, before Jesus can accept you, you've got to clean up your act. It has nothing to do with that and everything to say that accept one another just as Christ accepted you right where you're at. You know where it's easiest to find this transformational, unconditional acceptance? When you're in the midst of other people who have accepted and who have understood this transformational acceptance that can only come from God. When we live this free life, isn't it beautiful? We can live it with other people and we're like, wow, this is incredible. Wow, I don't have to worry. I can drop my pretenses. I can be me. And let's be honest, we all have the idea, we all have the drive to be imaginary, don't we? And I really believe that's why we collectively, right, we need a therapist. So, no, that's why we need a circle. We need a circle. We need individuals that know us, that love us, that fight for us, that value us. We need individuals that are in our realm, that can encourage you, that know what's happening behind the scenes, that you've dropped your pretenses with. That we're not trying to be imaginary for, but we're trying to be real with. When we began several years ago, I say several, it was like the fall of 2015. We had this crazy dream of creating a church just like this. A church not filled with rows, but a church filled with circles. The reason we believe that is because for me and many of the people in our circle, we had experienced difficulties in our life that warranted individuals to come into our life and fight with us and for us. And what we found over time is we found that a circle was one of the most valuable things that we could push forward with. That when you get into a circle, it's so much better than being in a row because you are known. You have people that you can consider are your people. And the beautiful thing is we hitched our wagon, if you would, to this organization in Atlanta, North Point Community Church. And North Point, the beautiful thing about them is they've never set attendance goals. They want one thing, and they want to push people into circles as much as they can. And their goal is this. They want to put over 100,000 people in circles in the Atlanta area. 100,000 people, think about that. And yet we're sitting here today. We're learning from. We're leaning in. We're saying, how can we leverage what they've done to remind people here that circles genuinely are better than rows? We realize in our circle that we're a bunch of insecure, dysfunctional individuals. And so how can we create a church for insecure, dysfunctional people? And I'm probably speaking for me and nobody else that was in that circle. That's just me. I needed to create a church for people like me that struggle with that. So we created a church that's based upon a circle. We created this place for people like us. And what is a circle? A circle is this. It is an opportunity. It's a place where you can find acceptance with a view to improvement. A circle is this idea where you can go in and you can drop the pretenses. You can be who you want to be. You can be honest about it. You can ask the questions, the difficult questions. So how could God even begin to do that? That so many times we've pushed that question away because it's church. You can't ask questions about that. God might smite you. But isn't those the questions we're asking? Thursday afternoon, last Sunday, I left church, had a lunch, drove, was getting ready to go home. I got a call of an individual who had passed away, 39-year-old. And they called me up the next day and said, hey, can you do the funeral? We don't have a church. We don't have anybody around us. Would you mind doing the funeral? And I got to walk in and have this conversation. And can I tell you, those individuals that were in that circle, those individuals, as I'm meeting with the family, talking after with the family, they were filled with the whys. I would be too. They were filled with what would happen. You are the spiritual leader. You're a pastor. Why would this happen? And I just sat back and I listened and we had conversations. And through the course of it, it was incredible to be able to talk with the family for a little bit of time. And I told them, I don't have answers. I wish I did. But I believe that God is big enough for your why. So keep asking, keep pushing, keep driving forward, and know that when you ask the why, God's not saying, oh, you ye of little faith. Because when we enter the why, it means we have doubt. And the only place faith can really harvest is in our doubts. So a circle is an acceptance with a view to improvement. The beautiful thing about a circle is this, is we believe it's three parts, essentially. You find real people, you make real friends, and you find real change. In the midst of the honesty, the transparency, you really get real. You find real people, you make real friends, and you find real change. And in the process of this, as you wrestle with it, we really believe that it's best found in groups roughly of 8 to 12 people, maybe 5 to 6 couples, whether married groups, single groups. We've got men's, women's, and married groups. And we really believe that when you open yourself up within a circle, you're going to find real people. You're going to find real friends. And you're going to find real change. Within our circles, sometimes they go over the sermons that they have a discussion base. Hey, what'd you think about what Scott said? And you can just butcher it, right? You're like, oh my goodness, what is wrong? And you have the freedom to do so. You also have discussion. You pray together. Hey, I know this is going to be difficult. I know you're walking through this. I know this is a hurdle. We want you to know we are with you, praying with you and for you. And I mean, let's be honest, with any good circle, there's food, right? And so, because that's a value, whether it's dinner or sometimes snacks. But we really believe that there's community there, that when we fight together, when we live together, when we encourage each other, there's circles. We want to push and encourage circles to happen. Because here's the reality, is I know it's difficult to really push transparency. It's difficult to program it. It really is. But we understand that there's times you might step into a circle and be like, those aren't my people. Those really aren't my people. Like, I thought they were my people. And we want you to know you have the freedom to be like, peace out. No hard feelings, right? Like, because we want you to know that to find this acceptance with a view to improvement, there's got to be that trust level. And not everybody is for everybody. We understand that. And we also understand we are in a very infant stage where we wish we could have all kinds of groups for all kinds of people all over the place. I mean, all over the stinking area. Not yet. But we're working at it. We want to drive circles because we believe that when we can become real, it will change our families. It will change our lives. It will change the people around us, and it will change the people we come in contact with. Some of our groups meet for like a school year. Some of them meet throughout the year. Some of them are like 2 years long, and that's awesome. But we give the group the opportunity to decide. So as I land the plane, here's just a couple thoughts. I know without a shadow of a doubt that the imaginary you doesn't have time for this. The imaginary you does not have time to invest in a circle. The imaginary you is looking at the time saying, okay, wait a second. I've got this job. I've got these demands. I've got these teams. I've got this going on. I've got this reality. But the real you is dying for it. The imaginary you is saying, I don't have time for this, but the real you knows that there are things on the inside that you wish you had somebody that you could be real and transparent with, that you could be you. I'd even go a step further and say for some of us, the imaginary me doesn't have time for this, but the real marriage in me is dying because it's not there. Because we don't have people we can be honest with, and we're trying to live this marriage together and make it work, and then, we need people to remind us at times that, Scott, you're being an idiot. You need to step forward. Scott, she's right, you're wrong. Like, we need people to have the freedom to say that. That's pretty much how that goes, is typically, Scott, you're... But, good, I'm not alone. But here's the truth, and we'll land here. Is every one of us thinks we live a wrinkle-free life, but we look in the mirror and we see the wrinkles. And I firmly believe that the purpose of a circle is to provide our wrinkle-free reality with a beautiful iron, to iron out the messes, to wade into the messes and say, hey, It's okay. God loves you. God's for you. And we are for you. Parents, it's valuable to have a group of people to remind you what you're doing is good. Parenting stinks. But you need people in your life that can encourage you and say, hey, thank you. Thank you. You're doing a great job. So having said that, we all want to be known for something, but I firmly believe we need to be known by someone. So we probably know without even thinking what we want to be known for. But my question is this: are you really known by anyone? Are you really known by anyone? That's where real life happens. God, we love you and we thank you so much for being a God that loves us. And God, I thank you for the fact that God, you are comfortable with our big questions. God, there are times in my life that I bring you questions that I feel like you would hate me for asking that question. And God, I thank you for the fact that you love me in the midst of that. I thank you for the fact that your shoulder is big enough to carry every single question we have. And God, we firmly believe that these questions deserve a conversation. People to remind us why we do what we do, to remind us that you are good, that you are faithful. People to remind us that it's going to be okay. God, we need circles. So God, I pray that you would allow us to find the opportunity to drop the pretenses and to be real. God, we love you and we thank you. It is in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen.